Urinboyev is an associate professor of sociology of law, conducting interdisciplinary research on migration, corruption, governance, and penal institutions in Russia, Central Asia, and Turkey. He authored the book Migration and Hybrid Political Regimes, Navigating the Legal Landscape in Russia, published by University of California Press in 2020. And today he's going to talk to us about Islam and community building in Russian prisons, a case study of Uzbek transnational prisoners in Russian penal institutions. Please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a nice introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And today I will talk about role of ethnic and religious identities in Russian prisons. And before I start, I would like to give a brief background about this research project. I was employed by the University of Helsinki by the project funded by European Research Council, and this project was headed by Professor Judith Pallet from the University of Oxford, and she received funding to study Russian prisons historically and from also from contemporary perspective. And one of the work packages of the project had to do with the issue of ethnicity and religion in Russian prisons. Mm-hmm. And this is how she approached me to be part of your project. And another reason I study this topic is connected with my previous research about migration in Russia. And the book published by California University Press is closely connected to this. So when I was doing field work in Russia, before I started this prison project, one unexpected outcome from my field work was that migrants' daily lives and then many things that permitted this undocumented migrants' lives were connected with the Russian prison. This was something that I couldn't anticipate when I started my migration research project in Russia. And very often, Uzbek migrant workers, Tajiks or Kyrgyz, they worked in a shadow economy without any documents. And of course, when you work in a shadow economy, there is no any written contract. And then absence of the state law or documented state doesn't mean that there is no order. There was an order, and this order was established through the criminal gangs operating in Russian prisons. In case, as a migrant worker, I'm undocumented, and if I cannot get salary, I usually got the phone number of Uzbek or Chechen sitting in Russian prison, and I could contact, and then Chechen through prison. They were well connected. They had the social media accounts, everything, and they could actually enforce labor contracts and then make sure that the migrants get paid. So this was something that I didn't expect, and this was an unanticipated finding. And then when Judith Pallet asked me to be part of this project, and this was, I saw it as a natural, logical continuation of my migration project. This is how this research project started. And last year I got a contract from University of California Press, again, for book project about Uzbek transnational Muslim prisoners in Russian penal institutions. So I am currently working on a book project, and this presentation today is one of the chapters of this book. So I will try to give a snapshot of this book project through the example of Uzbek migrant workers. And if I go to the second slide, there is I will try to address two dominant puzzles in the current understanding of Russian prisons, also as well as it's connected to the Gulag history with the Soviet times. And according to dominant understanding, still there is understanding that penal space, the prisons in Russia, continues to remain ethnically and religiously neutral, despite the ever-growing anti-migrant sentiments and widespread inter-ethnic tensions in the wider society. So this means prisons still stay isolated from this mainstream societal process from Russia. This is the understanding which we find when we study the academic literature on Russian prisons. And the lack of ethnic conflicts in Russian prisons, according to the existing literature, can be explained by the legacy of Soviet cosmopolitanism and long-term effects of the Gulag system that subjected all prisoners to the norms of criminal culture regardless of their ethnic belonging. And the Soviet criminal subculture, combining the idea of friendship of the people with an ideologically non-ethnic prison hierarchy system, limited the open, overt expression of ethnic solidarity and established the criminal cosmopolitanism model, which became a standard operating procedure for all inmates. So this is the dominant understanding so far we know about ethnic and religious relations in Russian prisons. Another Soviet legacy that makes penal institutions sites of cosmopolitanism is the closeness and remoteness of the prisons.
Could you please slow down a little bit?
Yes.
Just a little.
Yes. Another Soviet legacy that makes penal institutions like sites of cosmopolitanism is the closedness and remoteness of the prisons, which means prisons are dispersed in different parts of Russia, and then sometimes it's prisons are sent to Vladivostok while when the crime is committed actually in Moscow, for example. This means due to the geography of Russia, so this means these interethnic tensions and the religious factors don't play big roles. That's also one of the explanations. The legacy and persistence of Soviet criminal subculture, it's called Siv's law. In Russian it's Воровской закон or понятие, make Russian penal institutions significantly different from those in United States where ethnic conflicts frequently occur. This is the first passage which I will challenge through my empirical data involving 29 interviews with Uzbek ex-prisoners who served prison sentence in different Russian cities. So second puzzle is there is a growing discourse among Russian penal scholars and criminologists that Russian penal institutions are turning into sites of religious radicalization, conversion, and terrorist recruitment. That's also when you do a literature review of the existing publications of Russian scholars who write about Russian prisons, they usually present prison as the sites of jihad. This term prison jihad has become one of the dominant discourses in the contemporary Russian language scholarship concerning religion and ethnic relations in Russian penal space. You also find a similar discourse in the Western academic literature on prisons. In US, in UK, so when they talk about the role of Islam, they usually associate it with the instance of radicalization. So that's also one of the dominant. And of course, the Russian scholarship was also influenced by the debates taking place in the West. So, and much of the local Russian scholarship is repetitive and relies on information from central and regional media sources when developing their arguments. Usually they refer to media sources. Russian media sometimes reporting this is what happened in one of the correctional colonies, prisons, and then they are usually referring to each other. But there is not sufficient empirical data exploring these processes. And Russian penal research also, as I said, heavily influenced by Western penal sociological research, with excessively focus on prison radicalization and prison jihad when discussing prison's religiosity, especially this Islamic identity. The lack of empirical data led many Russian penal scholars to assume that Muslim prisoners' daily religious rituals and group-based praying practices are manifestation of radicalization and religious extremism. And one of the funny things is there is one organization, probably I think you know Tabligh Jamaat. It's seen as a radical organization, but at the same time praying together in a group, it's also called Jamaat Namaz. So when migrants talk about praying together in Jamaat, Russian penal sociologists equate it with Tabligh Jamaat, and then this is also seen. I've seen not only scholars based inside Russia, but also some of the scholars I met, they usually talked about Jamaat as being an expression of radicalization. Jamaat, as we know from daily Muslim life, I think all Muslims, pray in Jamaat. So this is a standard, And my research aim is to explore discourses surrounding the idea of prison jihad, so not based. Okay, so they to explore these processes through my empirical data involving 29 interviews with Uzbek ex-prisoners. The argument that penal space in Russia continues to exhibit the features of Soviet model of cosmopolitan universalism needs to be reconsidered due to ongoing transformations in Russia and globally. Large-scale labor migration that transformed Russian penal institutions into legally plural, ethnically, religiously plural environment. Then, in my research through interviews with 29 Uzbek ex-prisoners, I identified at least 4 types of prison subcultures. First subculture is it's not it's a kind of legal order. Is a colonial regime that's official regulations of the Russian state and everyday management practices at the institutional level. This is prison regulations, formal state law. And second legal order is traditional prison subculture, which is called Panyatya or Воровской закон. This is the 6th law. This is widespread in post-Soviet space and started from the late time period of the Soviet Union when criminal gangs, prison subculture became very strong in Russian penal space. And the third one is Muslim subculture based on Sharia law. This is something that I make contribution to existing research through my empirical data. And the number 4 is subcultures based on ethnic solidarity norms. Prisons are seen as ethnically and religiously neutral, but I challenge this argument through my empirical data. And key arguments. In my study, I challenge the widely held view among Russian criminologists and Western historians that penal institutions in Russia have traditionally been ethnically, racially, and religiously blind. First argument I make is a growing number of foreign prisoners with different ethnic backgrounds. Yes, this is disturbing, sorry. These different ethnic backgrounds, religious beliefs, and cultural values may erode the legacy of Soviet cosmopolitanism. Discourse of Druzhba narodov, friendship of nations, is no longer valid in contemporary times. And there is also research by Jeff Sakhadeyev which shows that even during the Soviet times, this notion of friendship of nations was a myth. So, and he talked about, he gave the example of Limitchiki, the Central Asian migrants who worked in the Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they were subject to daily harassment and discrimination. So even during these Soviet times, you know, this was a myth. So even though there are claims that friendship of nation was a cornerstone of this Soviet model. And second argument is the widespread use of smartphones and social media by prisoners in Russian colonies, prisons, may reduce the importance of distance between the inside and outside worlds, thereby enabling prisoners and their networks and families to stay in touch even when separated physically. This is due to the corruption in Russian prison. Many of my informants, when they served prison sentence, they had a daily connection to internet. They could make phone calls from their home, and they could actually also conduct their bank transactions. So they had also mobile banking, and due to the corruption, mobile phones easily accessible to prisoners. And there were 2 ways to get mobile phones. One way was someone from outside throwing the phone to the territory of the prison, and then prisoners are, you know, they have a system there, and they are collecting and bringing it to the dormitory, you know, to the premise of the prison. This is the first example. Second example, way of getting mobile phones to prison is, sorry, I will be a little bit rude here. So it's actually the Russian police officer, prison staff, bringing the mobile phone inside their anus. So that's also another way to get a mobile phone to prison. And of course, you know, mobile phones, as a result of these difficult operations, become more expensive. Like a basic Nokia mobile phone, if it's, let's say, 5,000 rubles outside in the market, then it becomes 10,000 rubles. And Nokia or iPhone, which is $1,000, it becomes $2,000 because it's very difficult to get it to prison. So there are 2 ways. So this is so due to these smartphones and social media, prison is no longer separated from mainstream society, because so prisoners while serving sentence, they become part of the social processes, political process outside the prison through the mobile phones. That's why this idea that cosmopolitanism and idea processes from outside not flowing is false, because there is daily connection. And some, I will give later examples. The prisoners usually have 2-3 mobile SIM cards. And the third argument is Islam and ethnic solidarity networks compete with established formal and informal orders and hierarchies in Russian penal space. So I will also empirically demonstrate this through. So to give a background, when we study migration studies literature, we usually find debates about how situation of migrants and refugees in the West, in US or Mexicans in US, or Latino immigrants, or refugee crisis in Europe. This is the mainstream debate about migration in migration studies. But during the last 2 decades, Russia has also become one of the top migrant destinations worldwide. So until recently, it was number 2 after United States. Now, because after the refugee crisis, it's among top 5 migrant receiving countries. And the vast majority of migrant workers come to Russia from 3 Central Asian republics: Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. Uzbekistan is the biggest migrant sending country. 2.2 million Uzbeks work in Russia. And this is due to the fact that there is a visa-free regime between Russia and other post-Soviet countries, which guarantees easier access. So you can just buy a train ticket or get to Russia through taxi or through airplane. And most migrant workers work in construction sectors, transportation, retail, and cleaning sectors. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, many migrants work without documents. They often become undocumented. This is due to the fact that Russian immigration laws are constantly changing, and they are complicated, and even for professional lawyers, it's not easy to understand these fast-changing immigration laws, because it could be, written, in a generic sense, way in immigration law, but very often immigration services, they have their internal documents, which is not accessible even to lawyers. So whatever you do, even if you do your best to stay legal, all of a sudden you become undocumented, illegal. Because this is due to the ambiguities, and Russian states tries to produce more undocumented migrant workers, because then they are easily deported, or they can be manipulated by Russian Wagner or Russian state to go to war in Ukraine, for example. Recently, my cousin was deported from Moscow to Russia. He was undocumented migrant worker until Russia started war in Ukraine, and then he was able to pay bribe to Russian police, and he was able to navigate the legal system despite his undocumented status. But now, last time, it was last year, September, when he was arrested by the Russian immigration officials, he was given 2 options: to choose to be deported, or to get paid of 200,000 Russian rubles and go to war to Ukraine. Then he decided, he asked them to deport him. So he was given 2 possibilities. So that's how this, the Russian state tries to keep them constantly in vulnerable, undocumented states. And of course, migrants are not well educated. Many of them don't speak fluent Russian, and they don't know the laws, and they usually come from the rural areas of Central Asia. And this means being illegal or illegal doesn't matter, because it's usually the prerogative of the Russian police and immigration officials or the judge to decide if you are legal or not. If they don't like your face, or if they are in a bad mood, so you may get deportation order, or if you are lucky, if the police officer is not fulfilling this monthly quota plan system, because every month police officers, they have to fine a certain number of migrants, they have to catch undocumented migrants for deportation, or they have to arrest a certain number of migrants with a criminal charge, and then they are sent to prison. So they have this kind of plan. If you are lucky, if you are not caught by police during this plan time, quota time, then you can actually pay bribe and you can continue working in Russia. So as a result of this shadow economy system, so migrants usually, some of the migrants commit crime, or they become victim of the fabricated charges by Russian police officers, and they move from shadow economy to Russian prisons. So that's one of the pathways for migrant workers. And as a result, a considerable number of Uzbek migrants, Tajik migrants, they end up in Russian prisons. And this is official statistics. Until 2020, Russian media provided some statistics about the number of foreign prisoners. Foreign prisoners include both the citizens of the post-Soviet republics, as well as prisoners from China, Vietnam, or even from United States. So there were some cases. So this is a number. It's the last statistic is 27,000, and then it's less than 10% of the total prison population. This is official statistics. But through my study, so then if we talk, Uzbeks are number 2. There are 6,362 Uzbeks serving prison sentence according to this 2020 statistics. But through my interviews, I have a different opinion than from this official statistics. When I interviewed these 29 ex-prisoners, I usually asked, where did you serve your prison sentence? How many prisoners, inmates were in the penal institution where you served your sentence, and how many, in your estimate, how many percent of these were foreigners? And usually, migrants gave, depending on the prison, they gave me statistics between 20 and 40%. So I say that the number of foreign prisoners 2 times more than the official statistics, and this is what I found through my interviews. And this is Muslim prisoners, so they are celebrating Eid. And I have, maybe I can show some videos to make it more life interesting. I need to share also this so that they can see. This is a typical Eid celebration. They're all Muslims.
This video.
The prisoners renovated themselves.
Конечно. Да, все сейчас понимаю. Конечно, конечно. Вот так стоит, да? Я возьму снимок.
As you see, they have mobile phones.
So it's like an Islamic center within the...
No, it's a kitchen.
Okay.
And Muslims, they get a lot of money from outside, so they renovated it for daily life. So it's because they can cook halal. You see, they are practicing the old Muslims. Yes, I can go back to the PowerPoint. It was not from prison, right? It was your phone.
Russian intelligence.
So, in order to collect data, I conducted field work in Uzbekistan. Of course, Russian prisons are not accessible. So, also due to research ethics, reasons, I cannot go there because it will compromise my own safety and safety of the informants also. What I did, usually after prison sentence is finished, Russian Federal Migration Service warmly welcomes migrant workers at the prison gate, meets them, and then they are taken directly to the detention center, deportation center, and usually migrants stay there 1 or couple of more months awaiting deportation, and they are usually deported to Uzbekistan so after the completion of their sentence. So I interviewed ex-prisoners who just recently returned from Russia, and I interviewed them about their experiences of prison life. So that's how I collect the data. And once you find a couple of ex-prisoners, then it's like snowball. They give you phone number of another prisons, and then this is how you get access. And luckily, in my case, my cousin also served prison sentence in Russia, so he was also freshly released. Then he acted as a gatekeeper, and actually they have a monthly get-togethers, and they meet and they cook together, and then they have this. In Uzbekistan we call it gap conversation. So they had this also their own social circle, because even though they served prison sentence in different Russian cities, thanks to mobile phones, they always stayed in touch with them. So later I will talk about why they stay in touch. But during my first fieldwork period in 2020, it was just before COVID started, before the COVID. So I conducted 10 interviews with ex-prisoners, and when I started, I didn't know the prison argot, jargons, and this first fieldwork period served as a kind of educational stage for me. So I learned prison argot. So, and then during second fieldwork, I was comfortable, and then I knew what to ask, and then instead of talking like ordinary, researcher, I immediately used jargon. And they were impressed. So I was able to collect richer, better data during the second fieldwork with 19 interviews with ex-prisoners. And ethnicity, 29 interviews, 20 Uzbeks, 2 Tajiks, 5 Russians, 1 Bashkir, and 1 Jew. Mostly I interviewed male prisoners, because there is a big difference between the experience of female and male prisoners. It's a totally different world. And I interviewed 27 male interviews and 2 female interviews, and their age was between 25 and 65. And then in Russia, there are 3 types of prison regimes. First regime, it's called they use the word zona. Mm-hmm. They don't use the term prison. So prison is called zona in Russia. And first type of the prison is red zona. Red means prison which is controlled, or daily life is organized according to Russian legislation, which means Russian police officers and then prison administration is in charge. So they are fully controlling the daily routines, when migrants should wake up and when they should go to work, and this means they are fully in control. Also the term red comes also from this Soviet Union, this Gulag times. The red means the government and Red Army. This is a state regulated prison. Second one is the black zona, which means if it's black, this means criminal authorities. Criminal subcultures are fully controlling the day-to-day governance, which means the prison authorities are just playing superficial role, and they have to negotiate with the criminal subcultures. For example, if you are in a black zona, which means you have full access to telephones, drugs, also sex workers, and so you can. And also card is played. This casino style. They play cards on a daily basis, and then you don't have to have this prison uniform, roba, so you can actually go with a t-shirt and then have free life, and then you have more time to meet people coming from outside, so you can also, they usually order it, sorry for these expressions, sex workers, and then sex workers actually came and served the prisoners. So this is, the unregulated. So this means prisoners, criminal authorities are fully in charge of daily life. And the third one is regime zona, which means 50-50. So prison authority and the criminal subculture, they are negotiating. So they reach a consensus, and then so both parties make concessions to each other. So that's the third type. So my informants served their prison sentence in all 3 types of zonas, prisons. And then in terms of time period, my data covers from even the Soviet times, 88, until July 2020. Yes, I go to the... So, and this is where I conducted most of my field work. And interestingly, this village was, during Soviet times, it was, Moscow, it was, under Moscow's direct supervision, because this is industrial zone in Fergana. And then Moscow provided all the subsidies. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, all of a sudden this village lost all the Moscow economic support. And then a lot of unemployment, and they go to Russia. So then this is why this is explained, one of the reasons why many of my informants come from this village in Fergana, Uzbekistan. And then during interviews, I explored, I was mainly interested in the role of ethnicity and religion, because of course I'm studying Uzbeks, the minority group in Russian prisons, of course. And then I was interested in the role of religion, ethnicity, землячество, which means sharing the common origin and then using it for building a community. In prisons, identity construction, whether at the prison level Muslims are concentrated together or separated, whether if there are illicit power hierarchies of Russian prisoners, these are paralleled by Muslim hierarchies, whether different Muslim groups, for example, Tatars, Muslims from North Caucasus, like Chechens and Dagestans, and Central Asians, Uzbeks or Tajiks, identify with one another, whether there is any open or hidden discrimination by prison officers, which rituals Muslim prisoners are allowed to practice, whether there is a differentiation on ethnic lines in the entitlement in Udo means early release from prison. And I also explored during my interviews where Muslim prisoners' position in prison hierarchies, how they identify themselves, how they perceive and relate themselves to the traditional criminal subcultures, types of social organizations or subcultures they are involved in, whether they reconstructed hierarchy in prison context or created their own subcultures, capitalizing on their ethnic and religious norms, and to what extent ethnic and religious relations in Russian prisons today are different from the Soviet era, when Central Asian transnational prisons were not foreigners during Soviet era. But I don't have the data for this, for the last one, so I need to do more literature review. And then, interestingly, when I asked prisoners to identify or give me the nickname or pseudonym, all of them had their paganiala, which means nicknames, which they used when they served in prison. So then they asked me to refer to them through their prison nicknames. So can I get some more water? Yeah. And these are, one of my informants here. So it's.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did the Muslims that you spoke to report using drugs or sex workers because that's haram in Islam? And if they did, were there any social repercussions among the other Muslims that you were doing something that's openly haram?
This is a very good question, and I will come to this. I think to then answering your question, I should explain these prison hierarchies. So in prison you have different types of prisoners. It's a very hierarchical system. First is it's called bratva, blatnoy, which means criminals, heads of the criminal subculture. They are called palazhents, which means representative of the thief in prison. So they were in charge of the prison's daily life. Which means they gave orders and prison followed them. So this is the leadership position. And then there is a second one, which means заинтересованные мужики, the men who are interested in thieves' law. So they were second in the hierarchy, which means they didn't work at all, because when you are in prison, you can choose to work or not. If it's red prison, then you have to work. There you cannot choose. But if it's black zona, which means you can decide to work, or if you don't decide to work, if you don't want to work, then you should do something which contributes to the criminal subcultures budget, because they have abshak, which means abshak means dormitory, common budget. So this second hierarchy, they didn't work. This male zainteresowani muziki. Instead, they assisted with the card game. They assisted the flow of the drugs and mobile phones to prison. So they actually served the leadership. So this is the second hierarchy. Third one is the muziki rabatyaga, which means hardworking. Muziki means men, hardworking men. So because they were not able to do so, because still, even if you don't, you need to do something and you need to work, and when you get your monthly income from prison, you should give part of your income to the criminal subculture. So you are contributing to the common economy. This is a third type, and the number 4 is Muslims, Muslim hierarchies. They have their own norms, and then they have their own imam, and then these are usually Chechens, Uzbeks, Dagestanis, Tajiks. And what they do is they cook separately. So they usually, because they don't, in many black zonas, they don't want to eat in the canteen, because usually the same pot is used to cook pork and beef. So then instead they cook separately inside the dormitory. It's called barak dormitory. Inside the barak they are cooking. And then they have their own self-control, social control mechanism. If you are Muslim, for let's say if I'm Uzbek, and if they see me eating pork, they exclude me from this group. Or I cannot, for example, the homosexualism is widely spread, and then Muslims are not allowed to practice homosexualism, for example. Because there is a lowest hierarchy, which means if you are in lowest hierarchy, you are cleaning the toilets and doing all the dirty work. And those prisoners who commit rape, or who rape children, or pedophile, or who engage in oral sex, for example, they usually end up in the lowest hierarchy. So that's why they are doing everything. And then, as a prisoner, they are usually engaged in in homosexual activities with them, because of course, and then if you are in this casta, the untouchable casta, if you shake your hands with these casta members, you also become one of them. That's why when the new prisoner comes to prison, you should never, if you are serving prisons, you should never shake hands. First, there must be investigation, and then the criminal subculture investigate what type of crime you committed, and then after everything is clear, if you have a clean profile, if you murdered someone, you are hero. So it's murdering is very welcome, but if you are raping, or if you are selling drug, you are not desirable. You cannot climb the hierarchies. So murdering, stealing, engaging in burglary, these are prestigious crimes. So, but oral sex can put you. For example, one of the prisoners, during one of the conversations, admitted to the friend that he did oral sex with his wife. They immediately moved to him to the lowest caste. So it's not. This is the moral code of the Russian thieves' law. So that's how they organize it. And of course, Muslims, they usually try to stay away from this haram practices like homosexualism, or drinking alcohol, or prostitutes, or pork. So that's why they have their. If I give example, when you are entering the dormitory, it's usually 400 or 500 people at least, and there are different corners. At the entrance, usually the untouchables. They are called upushni or abizhni, which means who fall. I mean, those who fall down. That's why when you are entering, they are usually at the entrance. So they cannot mix with others. So they are usually sleeping on the floor, and they are cleaning the toilet all the time. And then after them, and there is another corner, it's separated from them, and then hardworking men living there. And then in the middle there is a prisoners who serve the thieves, And then you have the thieves on the right side, and they have their corner. And interestingly, Muslims have their own corner. So they don't mix with others, and they have their corner, and they cook separately. And as I will show later in the PowerPoints, very often there were many conflicts between thieves and Muslims. And the Muslims, of course, they are not majority, but unlike Russians or non-Muslim prisoners, they are very well organized. They are united, and then there is ideology that in Islam there is no ethnicity. There is one ethnicity, which means Muslim. So under the leadership of Imam, they are united, and then they say it doesn't matter if you are Chechen, Uzbek, or Tajik. We are all Muslims. We should be. So there is a strong ideology uniting them. Yes.
Sorry, just to confirm, the different groups in the dormitory they are self-organized. These are not prison authorities that have determined that.
No, they're self-organized.
Yeah.
Because I'm talking about this black zone, where prison authorities have limited control. Of course, they can do some kind of checks, and they check mobile phones, but there are usually representatives, the members, sitting 24 hours outside the dormitory, and if someone is coming, they usually inform, and they are usually hiding things. So it's very well organized in this sense. And also, when prison authorities are putting pressure, they have this collective process where you are actually cutting your veins. And then they do it collectively inside prison, and there is a blood, and there will be a big scandal, and then the head of the prison may lose his job. That's why, because they do this writing, self-harming. So that's also one of the ways to put pressure on prison administration. Then it will be in social media and TV, and there will be big scandal. And so, of course, the head of the prison is not is afraid of losing his job. So that's how they are all jumping from the third floor and then harming themselves. And so you should sacrifice yourself for the benefit of everyone. And there were many cases they ended up in the prison's hospital, and so that's the daily life. Of course, it may sound like a movie, but this is how this is a recurring pattern which came in all my 29 interviews. So I was first, during 10 interviews, I had the impression that they are telling me fairy tale, but the more I dig deeper, and then I internalized, and it became part of me. And then next time, I also internalized this caste system, because if you shake hands with this Apushani, the lowest caste, you become one of them. And then I was also influenced, and I said, we should not interview those who raped women, because then I don't want to be one of them. So I was joking, and they were, also when my informants didn't show me those who were in the lowest caste, because even outside prison, they still influenced by the understanding they got from prison. So it was one of the prisoners. He didn't want to be interviewed, and then later they told me that he was one of those Apushani Abhijani. So that's part of this life. And as I said, they have mobile phones. One mobile phone SIM card is for making phone call inside Russia. Second mobile SIM card is to make a phone call to Uzbekistan, because they get a discount. So they get a special internet SIM card to make a phone call to Uzbekistan. And then third one is they have a SIM card which is connected to their mobile banking. So they can actually transfer money, and then there were cases when prisoners win in the card game, they can send money home also, and they can support the families also. So because there is a big money, it's a big economy. Yes, SIM cards, so Uzbeks served prison sentence in different colonies, prisons, but they were in contact with each other. For example, it was shame among Muslims or Uzbeks to have a member who because if you lose in card game, And if you cannot pay your debt on time, you become puflishnik, which means you will be moved again to the lowest caste. That's why it was very important among Uzbeks, because if one of their members become this puflishnik, cannot pay the debt from the card game, because they usually get 1 month's deadline. And then it's shame for entire Uzbek community inside the prison that they couldn't save their members. That's why when Uzbek, one of them loses in card, because Uzbeks usually make sure, ask members not to play the card because it's risky. But still, there will be, someone playing the card and then gets into debt, and then they make phone calls to other Uzbeks serving prison sentence. For example, if they are in Moscow, they call someone in Irkutsk or in Orenburg or some other Russian city, and then they are actually sending money. So this is how they solve the problems. Yes.
But their caste is not technically lowered. If you want to talk about like a Hindu caste system, they're not placed into the lowest caste.
No.
Being a Muslim who's playing at cards, who's gambling,
So
which is already haram.
yes, it's
But that's okay, just as long as you can pay your debt. Is that what,
yes,
how it
you
works?
should pay. Of course, the imam discards some of the from playing card, but it's people are people, so they make a mistake and then they lure it by the expectation that they can make money, and then they steal. So of course they usually, if they have also a limit. They support or solve your problem maximum 3 times. If you are playing constantly, then they don't help you. So you are given possibility to stop your harmful behavior. So.
Can I ask just a quick question on this haram discussion that we keep having? Is there a difference in perception of what haram is, say, in Central Asia among an Uzbek population than what perhaps might be perceived as haram in a different population? I mean, I don't want to relive tropes that we
Yes.
often hear from Central Asians themselves, but a somewhat looser interpretation and more flexible interpretation than we
It
might.
depends on the context. So the meaning may change. But there are basic things like eating pork, drinking alcohol, or cheating someone, and then the basic rules are similar. But of course, it might change depending on the context. For example, in my research about corruption in Uzbekistan, for example, there was one corrupt state official, but he constantly shared his wealth with the local community. So he used part of his income to send village members to Mecca for Hajj. So he financed at least 70, village members, pilgrimage. Then people usually in my daily life they say that he's stealing from state, but his income is halal because he's supporting community. So haram can be halal if you are showing generosity to the community. So same you can see in the prison context where you are if you are making money through card and then you are giving to the Opshak, the mutual fund of the Muslims, then it may be accepted. Also they cannot check because there is usually lots of migrants working outside. They are sending gref, which means parcels, food products to prison, especially during Ramadan time when it's 30 days. Muslims are the king, in prison because they are using a lot of food products from outside, and then there were many cases when Russians converted to Islam. This was a concern among Russian prison administration because then that's why they talked about radicalization and conversion because they used Islam instrumentally. So there were many cases when Russians became Muslim because it was comfortable, and then you become part of the community. And then also Muslims receive so much money from outside, and then they build their own toilet, for taharat, for purifying. And then Russians were not allowed to use this toilet. So it was only for Muslim, toilet. So, and very often, the Muslims are headed by Chechen, and Chechens are, have a reputation of being violent and not afraid of dying. And then, interestingly, Chechen was at the same time the head of the criminal subculture, and head of the Muslims also. So that's why Chechen had a dual head. So And Chechen, because of his position, he was able to also divert the resources to Muslims. And that's why many of my informants often were very proud that we were only 30%, we were minority, but we ruled the prison. So this was, they were very proud. And in Kazan, in capital of Tatarstan, they even declared Islamic Caliphate inside prison. And they were, marching in the prison, saying that Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and then Kazan became this Islamic Caliphate inside prison. And this is fairy tale. It sounds like this, but this data is coming from my interviews. Yes.
If I can ask another question, is there also something in the internal debates that exist in the regular Muslim world that we find in the prisons? Like I'm thinking specifically of the debate between, let's say, Salafi Islam and Sufi Islam.
Yeah, there were tensions.
Especially in
Yeah,
Chechnya,
among
because you have
Azerbaijanis, they had a problem to mix with other Muslims because they are Shia, and then all others were Sunni. So there were some tensions due to these Mazhab issues. The Shia Sunni. Also, Chechen Palagenits, the head of this criminal subculture, he wanted to make sure that the prisoners are not radicalized because there were some Dagestani and there were Salafi, they're very conservative, and then to make sure that Muslims are not the target of the Russian security service, they kept this radicalized, ISIS, prone prisoners separately in a separate corner. So then Chechen didn't want to mix them because otherwise then they will lose all the prestige, all the privileges they have. So at the same time, this Chechen Muslim also served the interests of the Russian state also by making sure that prisons are not radicalized. So in this sense, so Russian government also there were CCTV cameras because they usually used one of the dormitories as a mosque. So they had a mosque, separate building or room, and then during Friday prayers, there were up to 100 Muslims praying together. So they had the azan, Allahu Akbar, and then they had these regular practices. But every day in my interviews, there were at least 20 devout prisoners going to praying 5 times a day. But there were CCTV cameras, so Russian state installed, so they could control who is praying and who is regularly attending the mosque. So this was still controlled by the Russian state. Yes.
If I could just say, probably, I know that we've been having questions all along, but maybe 5 more minutes and then just so that there's time for some questions at the end.
So I can finalize then, or?
Yeah, you can, wrap up.
Yes.
I think there's probably other questions.
Yes, I think, I can read these general patterns. Many non-Muslim practicing Muslim became more religious, actually, because Islam offered possibility for them to have better life, and then it also offered protection because since they are in host society, Russia is a light society, and they don't have relatives visiting them. So then Islam was used also instrumentally. It offered alternative protection. Then this Muslim solidarity was maintained through this collective praying, Jamaat praying, risk sharing and social safety nets. And then informal social control was exercised by Imam, as well as Muslims controlled one another, which is pork eating or prayers, Ramadan. Ethnic minority prisoners united around their ethnic identity also as a safety net. Competition among different, also Uzbeks and Tajiks, also they had some, competition. If Uzbek gets into trouble, Tajiks laughed at Uzbeks, and that's why they wanted to keep the reputation of their ethnicity also. And also for Muslims, it was important that no one else cooperates with the prison authority, because cooperating with the prison authority was also was an example of being in shame, because if you cooperate with the prison and then if you report it, or if you, let's say, worked and then showed obedience to the prison regulations, this was also shame. So that's why Muslims tried to make sure that no Muslim cooperates with the prison authority. And interestingly, many imams were Tajiks. And also Tajiks were the richest because they often ended up in prison for narcotics. So they had also representatives working, and they usually got a lot of money. So they actually they could warn the other prison authority. I mean, head of the criminal subculture also with money. So Tajiks were the richest in prison because of their involvement in drug trade. Yeah, these are the examples. I know this is a bit rude, but this they make also distinction between the thieves' law and Muslims. So Muslims are not doing this homosexual acts, for example, and also they also compare it that this criminal subculture thieves' law also had origins in Sharia law. That's they made these stories about. Because the thieves' law were also seen as a source of justice, and then they said that because it came from Sharia law. So that's, they have different stories, they connected to Prophet Muhammad and different things. Also, they think that prison is a site of the being cultural, like you find very high level of kulturness, madaniyat in prisons. Even in Kremlin, you cannot find such madaniyat Putin sitting, Our way of life and our culture was similar to kulturness during the times of Pushkin or something. And there are different, funny examples from my interviews. And then, of course, showing ethnic solidarity was seen as a sign of being a prostitute. That's, they call it zemlятство, the criminal subculture, they highly discourage, supporting your countrymen. But in daily life, despite the fact that criminal subculture had tried to control this, but this was practiced anyway by different ethnic groups. Yes, let's see. So as you, this is a criminal subculture hierarchies. Bratva, порядочные мужики, prison for loyal, follow thieves' law, working men. And this one is number 4 is a lowest caste. Обиженные, пидоры, петухи, which means homosexuals. So,
Pedophiles.
yes. And then new hierarchy, Muslims. Yes, I think I can finish here. So idea is to show this community building around Islam.
Thank you.
Thank you.